pizza party. Woohoo! No homework. All right, we'll talk about the Jews in 9/11, okay? Some deep cuts here. So, all right, fine. I'll tell the story about 9/11 again. I know it's your favorite. Our annual tradition. This is our annual tradition. It's good to have traditions, you know. It's good to have traditions as a people. Some people, they make prime rib, hang up the stockings on Christmas. Some people, you know, they do weird traditions, you know. And we, every 9/11, we tell our origin story. The stones that were thrown on Ariel Sharon will be the first temple, as Peter Thiel would say. No, but so we're going to talk about 9/11. It's been 23 years, and it's really faded into the background. So many people I know were born after 9/11. I don't remember it. I was born in 1998. But so many people that watch this show, they're younger than me. And it is truly a generational thing at this point. Of course, for the older generations, it's the day the earth stood still. And it was the biggest thing ever. And even I remember growing up, it was sacred. You could not joke about it. I found that out at a very young age. Would you be surprised to learn that I was making 9/11 jokes in like second grade and getting in trouble? But, you know, I'm a congenital edgelord, okay? I can't, it's an incurable disease. But anyway, so 9/11, as we all know, the infamous day. And I think at this point, enough time has elapsed. Some serious discussion has occurred. There's not as much of an emotional reaction, and some of the censorship has abated. But now a real discussion is taking place, and I think people are becoming aware that it wasn't as it seems. And I always like to start there. I'm very fond of that expression, because that is really the beginning of knowledge, in my opinion, is that things are not as they seem. There is, you know, the way that things appear to be by our perception, and we're told by power what things are like, because we don't know. Who are we told by? We're told by the government. We're told by the media. We're told by Hollywood. And they create the world that we inhabit. They tell us a story about ourselves. They tell us a story about the world around us. And we are credulous. We believe it. And the beginning of knowledge is to realize that things are not exactly as they seem to be. Everybody understands that there is the appearance of what things are like, and appearance is not necessarily even what they look like, but generally speaking, the vibe that we get, what you might call normalcy or what's mainstream or regular. But it's not. There's something else going on. There are plots. There are conspiracies. There are shadowy forces and ulterior motives and hidden agendas and secret armies, secret forces that operate, and deception is their weapon, you could say. You could say that deception is their method. And they're waging a war on us. And our credulity, our credulousness is their greatest asset. And so let's start with 9/11, that things are not as they seem. I think that's where everybody is. The Twin Towers were attacked. The Pentagon was attacked. There was a fourth target, which was not struck. A plane crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. And they said it was the work of 19 hijackers, Arab Muslims, mostly from Saudi Arabia, working under Osama bin Laden for a group called Al-Qaeda. They trained in Afghanistan. The Taliban took over and allowed for them to prepare such a thing. And this is a story that we're told. There was a clash of civilizations between the Crusader state of the United States of America and the Muslim world, which was in the grip of a young, very radical population possessed by Islamism, possessed by a zealous religious conviction in Salafist Islam and a political ideology that they would create a Muslim theocracy or a caliphate in the world. That is the narrative that we are told. But what we have learned since 9/11 is that those events set in motion a lot of things. It set in motion the war in Afghanistan. And not only that, but a truly global war, what they called the global war on terror. No formal declaration of war was given on Pakistan or Yemen or Syria, but there was a formal declaration of war on terror, which has been stretched to accommodate conflicts on many continents, mostly under the purview of the CIA, but also wars under the Pentagon. And it was also a pretext to expand state police power, in particular surveillance, but also control over travel and money. It saw the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, which regulates a lot of things. It spies on citizens. And you could say that it expanded the mission of the Central Intelligence Agency, whose jurisdiction is the rest of the world, into the interior of the United States. You could say that is what 9/11 did. And so in retrospect, when you look at the implications of 9/11, you have to question, is 9/11 something that we went too far? Or were all of those things that took place since, was that the agenda from the very beginning? And 9/11 was a carefully created excuse, pretext. And we see this throughout time. This is how wars start. This is what justifies, in some cases, homicide in the microcosm and the macrocosm, whether it's a murder in a family or whether it's a global war like the one we've seen over the past 20 years. You understand that false flags, deception plays a role. This is how World War II started. This is how we got involved in World War I. That's how we got involved in Vietnam and other things. And so people recognize that, maybe there's something more to the story about 9/11. Maybe it was carried out by somebody other than these 19 hijackers. Maybe there was some other element that was complicit, or maybe even planned it from the very beginning. And I think the details are difficult to figure out because it is shrouded in mystery. Nobody can know for sure. There is no hard evidence of anything, but there are clues. But I want to specifically focus tonight on the case of who benefits from 9/11. I want to talk about not necessarily even the events of 9/11, but the world before 9/11 and the world after. And specifically, I want to talk about 4 documents which I think shed a light on what's going on in 9/11. And yes, it is a story about Israel. It's a story about the region. It's a story about Saudi Arabia, Osama bin Laden, Iraq, Israel, the Likud party, and the Jews in the United States. And I think this will shed some light on what exactly took place that day. Because, of course, when people believe there's a conspiracy about 9/11, it tends to focus on things like oil. They say Bush went to war for the oil. Or they talk about defense contractors. They say Halliburton and Lockheed and the Rand Corporation, this military-industrial complex, they brought us to war. And they focus on the American security apparatus. They talk about the CIA, or they talk about the elected officials like Bush. But the element that nobody is allowed to talk about is the number one beneficiary of the 9/11 attacks, which is the state of Israel and its allies in the U.S. government. So let's rewind. And I want to read to you the foreword of a book. The foreword is written by Israel Shayhak. The article is by a man named Oded Yanon. And Yanon was a senior advisor to Ariel Sharon. This is important. I'm going to need you guys to pay attention. So Ariel Sharon was a radical Zionist in Israel, brutal, committed war crimes and massacres. He was the architect of the 1982 Israeli war in Lebanon. Ariel Sharon was the defense minister of Israel, so he led Israel's war in Lebanon in 1982. And by the way, Osama bin Laden said that he got his idea and his inspiration to hit the towers because he saw the high-density urban high-rises in Beirut, Lebanon, burning in the 1982 war. So think about this. Where did bin Laden get his idea to fly planes into 9/11, ostensibly? He said, I decided to fly planes into the buildings because I witnessed the burning skyscrapers in Beirut, Lebanon, when Israel waged its brutal war in 1982, spearheaded by Ariel Sharon, the defense minister, and a Likudnik. So Oded Yinon, his senior advisor, wrote in 1982 a document called A Strategy for Israel in the 1980s. It's a very long document. It's very complex. But this is the foreword to it by an Israeli scholar named Israel Shayhak. And I'm going to read to you word for word what it says about this strategy. It says, quote, the plan written by Ariel Sharon's senior advisor, published in 1982, this plan operates on two essential premises. To survive, Israel must become an imperial regional power and must effect the division of the whole area into small states by the dissolution of all existing Arab states. This is Ariel Sharon's plan in 1982 when he's the defense minister waging war in Lebanon. He says Israel must become an imperial world power, and to do that, we have to dissolve all the existing Arab countries into smaller countries, divide them up. It says they seek acquiescence, the Israelis, in their designs by the Lebanese, Syrian, Iraqi, Jordanian, and other Arab governments as well as by the Palestinian people. What they want and what they are planning for is not an Arab world, but a world of Arab fragments that is ready to succumb to Israeli hegemony. Yinon, in his essay, talks about far-reaching opportunities that are created by the very stormy situation that surrounds Israel. The Zionist policy of displacing the Palestinians from Palestine is very much an active policy, but is pursued more forcefully in times of conflict. The Israelis displace the Palestinians always, but they do it more during conflict. Opportunities are created by the stormy situation in the Middle East for Israel to dissolve the Arab states. It is also clear that the Palestinians were never the sole target of Zionist plans, but the priority target, since their viable and independent presence as a people negates the essence of the Zionist state. Every Arab state, however, especially those with cohesive and clear nationalist directions, is a real target sooner or later. So it says the Palestinians are not the only target, they're priority because they're closest. And their existence undermines the essence of the Israeli state because it contradicts their legitimacy. But it says actually every Arab state, especially the nationalist ones, those are targets. It says the idea that all the Arab states should be broken down by Israel into small units occurs again and again in Israeli strategic thinking. The strong connection with neoconservative thought in the United States is very prominent. But while lip service is paid to the idea of the defense of the West from Soviet power, the real aim of the author and of the present Israeli establishment is clear: to make an imperial Israel into a world power. In other words, the aim of Sharon is to deceive the Americans after he has deceived all the rest. Ariel Sharon was the prime minister of Israel during 9/11. He took power in March 2001 and died in 2006. This was his senior advisor in 1982. In 1982, writing about their plans for Israel, they say, this idea of splitting up Arab countries into smaller units that cannot threaten Israel, and especially the nationalist ones, He said that idea occurs over and over in Israeli strategic thinking. They're obsessed with this idea. The Israeli establishment, the right-wing Likud party, which also constitutes the IDF, which was born from the Haganah, he said they're obsessed with this idea that the only way to make Israel safe is to destroy the Arab world. All these strong nationalist governments have to be ripped apart by seizing upon their ethnic, religious, sectarian cleavages and division within those countries so that none of them can threaten Israel and they will succumb to the hegemony of an imperial greater Israel. 1982. This is the Clean Break Report in 1996. Fast forward 14 years. This was commissioned by the Israeli government under Bibi Netanyahu, and the main author is Richard Pearl, but it was also worked on by Douglas Faith and David Wormser, who went on to work in the Bush administration, and they were the architects of the Iraq War. They wrote this: Syria challenges Israel on Lebanese soil, an effective approach and one which Americans can sympathize with would be if Israel seized the strategic initiative along its northern borders by engaging Hezbollah, Syria, and Iran as the principal agents of aggression in Lebanon, including by paralleling Syria's behavior by establishing the precedent that Syrian territory is not immune to attacks emanating from Lebanon by Israeli proxy forces, meaning we can bomb Syria whenever we want, kind of like the situation now. Israel can shape its strategic environment in cooperation with Turkey and Jordan by weakening, containing, and even rolling back Syria. This effort can focus on removing Saddam Hussein from power in Iraq, which is an important Israeli strategic objective in its own right, as a means of foiling Syria's regional ambitions. This was in 1996 by a bunch of Jewish authors commissioned by Netanyahu for the Israeli government. The authors later went on to work in the Bush administration during the global war on terror and the war in Iraq. This third document is Osama bin Laden's 1998 fatwa. He wrote two, one in 96, one in 98. This is what bin Laden says. He says, quote, "For over 7 years, the United States has been occupying the Arabian Peninsula, terrorizing its neighbors, and turning its bases into a spearhead through which to fight the neighboring Muslim peoples. The best proof of this is the Americans' continuing aggression against the Iraqi people, using the peninsula as a staging post, even though all its rulers are against their territories being used to that end, but they are helpless. Second, despite the great devastation inflicted on the Iraqi people by the Crusader Zionist alliance, and despite the huge number of those killed, which has exceeded 1 million, despite all this, the Americans are once again trying to repeat the horrific massacres as though they are not content with the protracted blockade imposed after the ferocious war or the fragmentation and devastation. Third, if the Americans' aims behind these wars are religious and economic, the aim is also to serve the Jews' petty state, Israel, and divert attention from its occupation of Jerusalem and murder of Muslims there. The best proof of this is their eagerness to destroy Iraq, the strongest neighboring Arab state, and their endeavor to fragment all the states of the region, such as Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Sudan, into paper statelets, like a state, statelet, like smaller state, and through their disunion and weakness to guarantee Israel's survival and the continuation of the brutal crusade occupation of the peninsula, the Arabian Peninsula. The ruling to kill the Americans and their allies, civilians and military, is an individual duty for every Muslim who can do it in any country in which it is possible to do it, in order to liberate the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Holy Mosque from their grip, and in order for their armies to move out of all of the lands of Islam, defeated and unable to threaten any Muslim. So, these are 3 documents. I'm going to read the follow-up, the 4th one, later. But this paints a picture for you of the situation that is unfolding in the Middle East, specifically in Saudi Arabia, in the minds of Osama bin Laden and the Arabs, but also on the minds of the Israelis before 9/11. There's a gathering storm. We're after the Yom Kippur War of 1973, and after the Camp David Accords, in which Israel returned the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt in exchange for peace. There is a clean break in Israeli strategic thinking, where they say we cannot live among a powerful Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and continue to survive. We have to dissolve all of the powerful neighboring states. And they say in order to do that, we must deceive America using the neocons by portraying this as a battle between the Soviet Union and the West. We'll pretend to be a satellite of America in their fight against communism. We'll pretend to be a satellite of America in their war against Islam. But in reality, Ariel Sharon said, his senior advisor said, according to Israel Shayhak, what we're really doing is deceiving the Americans last to use their military and seizing upon opportunities provided by a very troublesome situation in the Middle East, all the complexity and violence, to stir up the region and ultimately destroy the Arab nations and divide them so they cannot challenge Israel, and that therefore Israel can have hegemony and become a great power among the other great powers, like the United Kingdom, like France, like China, like the Soviet Union, like the United States. They say Israel's the only place where the Jews can be safe, not in the Soviet Union, not in America, not in Europe, only in Israel. And the only way for Israel to be safe is for them to destroy all their neighbors and to become a global power. And then 9/11 happens. 9/11 happens. Ariel Sharon becomes prime minister in March 2001. At the same time, Israeli art students are being caught all over the United States. You can look this up. 200 of them were rounded up by the CIA. They were found roaming the halls of federal government buildings, taking pictures. They were Mossad agents in the first half of 2001. Hundreds of art students that were here to take a look were actually secret Mossad spies. September 11, 2001, the towers go down. And there's all kinds of questions about the explosions that were heard by eyewitnesses coming from the basement of the towers before they came down. And there's all sorts of fake evidence that's been presented. For example, there was all sorts of evidence about who the attackers were because their luggage was mysteriously intercepted at the airport. And one of them had the misfortune of their passport falling out of the sky when the plane crashed into the Twin Towers. I'm not making that up. The 9/11 Commission report said they identified the attacker because when the plane crashed into the building, his passport floated to the ground and someone scooped it up and found it. That's what they say. 9/11 hijackers who couldn't pilot a single engine plane took control of a major airliner jet engine and expertly flew it into the Twin Towers. And NORAD was not activated and air defense was not activated. Jets were not scrambled. 9/11 happened. And then, as if they knew in advance precisely what would take place, a number of Israelis were arrested just across the river in New Jersey photographing it. They had set up a camera on a tripod to record the event and were caught dancing and celebrating. Other Israelis were caught in a van in the tunnel with explosives, and they were later identified as Mossad agents. They were returned to Israel. All these things just happened. And then, after 9/11, the United States went to war against every Arab Muslim country. The United States went to war in Afghanistan, where the Islamist Taliban operated. They also engaged a bombing campaign in Pakistan, in the federally administered autonomous areas, the tribal areas where the Pashtun live in northwest Afghanistan, where the Taliban operated, northwest Pakistan. They engaged Yemen in a bombing campaign that lasted 20 years and is going on today. They invaded Iraq and toppled Saddam Hussein then engaged in an insurgency. The United States tried to end it in 2011, but then the United States not only redeployed to Iraq, but also to Syria in 2014 to defeat ISIS. We toppled Gaddafi in 2011 in Libya, one of the number one supporters of the Palestinians. Sudan has been split in two, and now it's going to be split again because there's a civil war going on. Assad was nearly toppled. Lebanon was subjected to a brutal war in 2006. Gaza Strip and West Bank have been subjected to major operations, specifically in 2012 and 2014. And you can take a look at a map of the Middle East, and just about every single Muslim country has either been subdued through bribery from the United States and has normalized relations with Israel. And those countries would be Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, Egypt, or they have been destroyed, like Libya, Sudan, Lebanon, Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen, Iraq, and soon to be Iran, which is now suffering under the weight of sanctions. And it's like I said, who are the key players involved? Ariel Sharon, the Likudnik, said in the 80s, "It is our plan to create an imperial Israel by destroying all the powerful nationalistic Arab states." In 96, Netanyahu commissioned a clean break report with Richard Pearl and Douglas Faith and David Wormser saying, to secure Israel's northern border, they must topple Saddam Hussein. They must be able to set a precedent to airstrike Syria with impunity and target Iran, Lebanon, and Hezbollah. In 98, bin Laden said, "We are going to war with the United States because they are dividing Arab countries. They're destroying the most powerful Arab country, Iraq. They're using the Holy Land to wage a war. They're trying to destroy all Arab countries on behalf of the petty state of Israel. It's a Zionist Crusader alliance." And then one day, suddenly, for no reason at all, 9/11 occurs after hundreds of Mossad agents have been rounded up all year, as Ariel Sharon, the author of the plan in the 80s, becomes the prime minister, and the authors of the Clean Break Report take control of the Pentagon under the presidency of George W. Bush. Perfectly situated, they both in tandem, the United States and Israel wage a global war on every Muslim country that hasn't submitted to Israel, which is going on to this day. And they say it was for the oil. They say it was for Halliburton, democracy, or they say it just happened. So basically, a bunch of guys got in some planes and they flew them into buildings, and then their passport floated down to the ground, and with everyone getting mesothelioma and cancer and all the dust particles and 2 exploded, destroyed buildings and the 7th tower, someone dusted off the passport and delivered it to the U.S. government, and that's how they know. And this is what bin Laden wrote in 2004. He says, "God knows it did not cross our minds to attack the towers, but after the situation became unbearable and we witnessed the injustice and tyranny of the American-Israeli alliance against our people in Palestine and Lebanon, I thought about it. And the events that affected me directly were that of 1982 and the events that followed, when America allowed the Israelis to invade Lebanon, helped by the U.S. Sixth Fleet." Statement from 2004. And where are we today? Where are we today? Netanyahu, who commissioned the Clean Break Report, part of the same party of Ariel Sharon and Menachem Begin, clinging to political power, waging a war of expulsion against the Palestinians and attempting to goad the United States to destroy Hezbollah in Lebanon and to target Iran, the last remaining Islamist power that is set on overturning the Israeli hegemony in the Middle East. It's the same story. It's all part of the same story. To this day, they want to expel the Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank. That's why David Friedman, Trump's former ambassador to Israel, is pitching in a forthcoming book to President Trump that Israel should annex the West Bank and Gaza Strip and expel the Palestinians. And that's why Netanyahu is confident that he will be able to use the Trump administration to occupy South Lebanon, which the Israelis, specifically the revisionist Zionists, believe is their birthright. It's part of the promised land in greater Israel. To secure their northern border, they have to diminish Hezbollah and take over all the land south of the Litani River. And in the process, neutralize Iran by taking out its oil and natural gas resources and its nuclear complex, leaving the Middle East completely vulnerable to an imperial Israel, just as Ariel Sharon, senior advisor, described it 40 years ago. Surprise attacks, surprise attacks. October 6th, 1973, massive Arab surprise attack against the Israelis. The United States intervenes, and this is what creates the neocons and the clean break and everything. October 7th, 2023, 50 years later to the day, Hamas invades and it justifies the most expansionist war since 1967. September 11, 2001, the towers are hit. We go to war in Afghanistan and Iraq. September 10th, 2014, Obama redeploys troops to Iraq and Syria to fight ISIS, setting the stage for them to be attacked by the IRGC and Iran to this day and their network of proxies, drawing us into the current conflict. Surprise attacks, dates, names. They rhyme. They're all familiar. They're all connected. And now we're going to get Trump and Vance. And what did J.D. Vance say? Well, he echoed the Clean Break report. He says we need an independent Israel. We need to supply Israel with the means to destroy Iran by themselves so they don't need our foreign aid. Do you understand what's going on here? We are building a rival great power. Israel has ambitions to be a great power. Our birth rate is down, their birth rate is up. Our country's being buried by diversity, theirs is homogeneous. They're an ethno-state. We're weakening every day. They're investing in the technology of the future. We built their Iron Dome. They won't share the source code with us. They're building relationships with China and Europe and Saudi Arabia. And they recognize the United States, maybe they don't want to put all their eggs in one basket. We built Israel. We're building a rival great power. They're going to have hegemony over the center of the world island. If they control the Middle East, they control the depleting oil reserves of the world, significant natural gas resources, Suez Canal, Strait of Hormuz, the gateway between the Eurasian African continent, what many people have said is the key to controlling the world. And they're doing it by placing all of their fifth column elements inside the U.S. government. That's why it's the neocons in the media that agitated for it. It's the think tanks in Washington that wrote the playbook. It's the Jews inside the DOD and inside law enforcement that executed it. They said Israeli generals roamed the halls of the Pentagon and the White House like they lived there during the Iraq War, during the Bush administration. Their element in the media lies about it. In academia, they cover it up. Look up Columbia Unbecoming and what's going on with Bill Ackman. They're decapitating any academic institution that opposes Israel, just as they've been doing for 20 years, just as Dr. Alamaru, Bronze Age pervert, and his friend Bari Weiss, a protege of Yoram Hazony, wrote about in 2004 with Columbia Unbecoming, and Yoram Hazony is now running NatCon, where J.D. Vance spoke just 2 months ago. And Vance got all his support from Thiel. Half of his net worth is in Palantir, which is a front for the Mossad inside of our CIA. And guess who is running the global war on terror? The CIA. We're still in the same war. All because of 9/11. It was not what it appeared to be. As we all know, this was an Israeli false flag. And this is the creation of the great power of Israel. Jordan Peterson talks about it. Peter Thiel talks about it. Curtis Yarvin's basically talking about it. It's talked about in the protocols of the elders of Zion. It's a forgery. That's weird why it's so correct then. But that's what's going on. And that's the truth about 9/11. And people want to get caught up in, does jet fuel melt steel beams? I'm more interested in the gathering storm around the Arabian Peninsula and Iraq that led to 9/11 and what 9/11 justified. It plays a role. It's a mechanism. And I don't think it's in the interest of I don't think it's in the interest of the United States to create a great power, Israel, to lord over the Middle East. Israel should be our satellite. And if they won't be, then we should find some other satellite in the Middle East. Why is that in our interest to create another great power to compete with? Why is that in our interest to create another great power that has infiltrated our country? Israel has extensive ties in the United States. How is that? That would be like if China was China, but also it had Chinese people all over the government, media, Hollywood, academia, and they ran our society too. There's a word for that. It's called world domination. In order to make the world safe for the Jews, they have to control the whole world. That's where it's gone. To make the world safe for the Jews, first they need a country. But then they need to defend their country. Well, we need a little more land. We need some living space. But now we're not safe unless there's any country in the region that challenges us. And until we have nukes, what happens then? What happens then? What happens when they have total control over the oil in the Persian Gulf? And they manipulate the United States. And they create technology and artificial intelligence, and they have the CIA, the data, and the AI at their disposal. Not good, not good. And they hate Catholics. Like our friend said, Adam King, the other day when we debated with him and Gavin McInnes, who's a Shabbos goy. And I like Gavin, but I mean, it is what it is. He's not really doing me a ton of favors lately with what's going on over there. But Gavin and Adam King debated, and Adam King said, I would destroy the Catholics before I destroy the Muslims. And he said that when the Jewish Messiah comes, he's going to destroy the Catholic Church. You think their designs end when they take out the Al-Aqsa Mosque? Their designs are on Rome. They're coming for Rome. They're coming for us. Maybe there's nothing we could do to stop them. But that's where this is going. But that's the truth about Israel. So that's that. But I want to move on and take a look